What is up, everyone? It is Quinn here, back with another video. A few days ago, I went through, most of the big time fantasy free agent signings, and I talked about how in the next few days, I was going to be updating my way too early 2023 rankings. So in this specific video, I'm going to be rerunning my top 12 running backs for the 2023 season. Obviously, these could still switch up, with some late free agent moves. The NFL draft could shake things up also, but this is where I'm sitting right now, and I'm also actually going to be dividing these into tiers. I believe we have 4 tiers for these top 12 running backs. And then also one guy that I talked about in my first set of rankings, I talked about Bijan Robinson. I think I had him like running back 4, running back 5. When I was going through these rankings again, there were some guys who could be really worthy of being a top 12 player. And so I didn't really think it was fair to have Bijan Robinson in there when we don't even know like what NFL team he's going to be on. So I took him out of these rankings. Once he gets drafted, I'm very confident he'll be back in the top 12, but we're going to be going with just guys who have actually played in the NFL, none of these running back prospects, just because we don't have the landing spot. But let's just jump right into it, and I'm going to start it off with one of my 2 tier 1 players, and at number 1, I have Christian McCaffrey. He's coming off of a big-time 2022 season. He was the RB2 in half-point PPR points per game. When I'm going to be referencing points per game, I'm just going to be rolling with a half-point PPR, for this video. And if we look at his numbers when he was just with the 49ers, so if we're taking away, his early season numbers with the Panthers, he actually would have been the running back 1 overall in points per game. He's a guy who came out, he beat the injury-prone narrative. Remember, 2020, 2021, super banged up, only played 10 total games in those 2 seasons. That's why people were fading him. There was a lot of people out there, I can't take him with the first pick. He can't stay on the field, ignoring the fact that he had been super healthy throughout college and early on in the NFL. Remember, the running back position, injuries are going to happen, but none of his injuries were super, catastrophic, and none of them were, repeat injuries where you could actually label him injury prone. So in 2022, bounced back, beat the narrative, played a full 17-game season, plus 3 playoff games. So I think we're past that. Now, keep in mind, that's not to say that Christian McCaffrey won't go out in 2023 and get hurt. Like, the running back position is tough. They take on a lot of wear and tear, but I don't think he's any more likely to get injured than really any of the other running backs that are also going in this range. He may not even be a guy who has a top 5 workload with the 49ers. We did see games where they relied on Elijah Mitchell. They weren't just totally force-feeding Christian McCaffrey, but in his opportunities, he's going to be efficient. He's going to be super involved as a pass catcher. He's going to have a ton of touchdown upside on this 49ers offense. And keep in mind also, like, Christian McCaffrey was traded mid-season. He was used pretty creatively by the 49ers, and we didn't even have Kyle Shanahan, scheming him up throughout the offseason. I think Christian McCaffrey is going to be a focal point of this offense, and I think he is going to have another big season, as long as he can stay on the field. Now, the second player I have in tier 1 is going to be Austin Eckler, and for this video, I'm just going to be assuming that he stays with the Chargers. There have been some reports, he's done some interviews. He's not currently happy with his contract situation, but if he is on the Chargers heading into 2023, his role is just going to be elite. In 2022, Eckler led the NFL in targets, receptions, and routes run. So, we know the receiving workload is going to be there. Maybe those decrease a little bit with the wide receiver room staying maybe, a little healthier in 2023. But the thing that I thought was most impressive, that he was able to repeat his big 2021 touchdown numbers. I believe he scored 20 touchdowns in 2021. A lot of people thought that was unsustainable. He put up 18 this past season, and that's with him not even being like crazy involved on the goal line. Like, it's not like he had a monopoly over the goal line opportunities, but he still was able to, score a ton of touchdowns. Now, if he does move teams, this could change in terms of him being at number 2. Maybe he's 3, 4, 5, 6, somewhere in there, because we just don't know what the usage is going to be like. But until then, until we hear he's on a different team, he's going to stay here at number 2 for me. Hopefully him and the Chargers are able to figure that contract out. Now, moving into tier 2, the first player I have here is going to be Saquon Barkley, number 3 overall. He's going to be back with the Giants after being franchise tagged. And just like Christian McCaffrey, Saquon was another dude who proved he could stay healthy basically over a full season. He missed 1 out of 17 games. He also stayed healthy with a super strong workload, had an 80.1% opportunity share, which ranked 3rd in the NFL. I really think the main area for improvement for Saquon could come in the touchdown department. He got into the end zone 10 times, which isn't terrible, but with that kind of workload in 16 games, you'd be hoping a guy like Saquon would score 12, 13, 14, 15, maybe even 16 touchdowns over the season. It didn't happen, but the Giants have made some offensive improvements. They brought in Darren Waller. I think they're going to continue to make some upgrades, hopefully at the wide receiver position. And I just think, rising tides are going to lift all the ships here. Saquon Barkley is going to be a beneficiary of that, and I think he could see a bigger touchdown season while replicating his 2022 workload. And then the second and final player in Tier 2 is going to be Jonathan Taylor. I just think he's a prime candidate for a huge bounce back here. He was a guy who was pretty close to being the consensus number 1 pick. I think I had him as my running back 2. I did have CMC there, but I do think I was in the minority in terms of liking CMC at that number 1 spot. Jonathan Taylor overall, it was just a disaster season. He played in 11 games and, was the RB 18 in points per game, which was definitely not what you were expecting if you're taking him 1st, 2nd, 3rd overall. The offensive line fell apart on the Colts. The quarterback play was really, really poor. And then we had Jonathan Taylor dealing with, different ankle injuries throughout the season. Ended up, wrapping up his season early. But this is the same guy who finished as the RB1 in the 2021 season. So I'm not willing to just, totally throw him away. I think this Colts offense should be better. They're probably going to have one of these rookie quarterbacks coming in. They're going to rely on Jonathan Taylor. And I think he's a guy who should be considered a top 5 running back heading into this next season. Now, moving into Tier 3, this is definitely going to be the largest tier. I really think a lot of these guys could be flipped around, so I'm not super set in stone here. You can kind of just pick what type of player you want in this range. But at number 5, I'm going to be going with Derrick Henry. Now, I do have some reservations just due to the fact that Henry's getting up there in age. We know he's had some massive workloads, but it just feels like every season we're saying, Henry's due to fall off. This is going to be the year. And then he just goes out, balls out, takes on a huge workload, and he doesn't fall off at all. Last season finished as the RB3 in points per game, played in 16 out of 17 games, averaged close to 22 carries a game, and then also actually had one of his best receiving season of his career, 33 receptions, 398 receiving yards. So nothing crazy, but when Derrick Henry's, making his money on the ground and then you're adding that receiving work on top of it, definitely going to help him out for fantasy. And actually, as a receiver, he was super efficient. He was the RB1 in yards per route run and yards per reception. So maybe we even see a slight increase in his receiving workload from the 2022 season. Now, if you're concerned about that fall off, I really, wouldn't be pushing too hard against it. If you thought he should be more RB7, RB8, I'd be fine with it. For me, I'm just willing to take the swing here because if Derrick Henry's on the field, his workload is going to be huge and he is going to be producing for you. Now at number 6, I have Breece Hall, also in Tier 3. At this point, I'm just going to be assuming that Aaron Rodgers is a Jet. When I'm recording this, that trade has not been finalized, but it just feels like, that trade has to happen. If we look back at Breece Hall last season, he was the RB7 in points per game. Now, obviously, he only played in 7 games, but what's crazy about that rank at RB7 is that in those 7 games he played, the first 3, he was in a committee with Michael Carter, and then he left early in the 7th with that ACL tear. So, he was really the workhorse, or, not even the full-on workhorse, but kind of the guy for 3 of those games. He had under 10 carries in 4 of the 7 and still managed to be a mid-tier RB1 when he was on the field. I think if he didn't tear his ACL and just kind of continued on the trajectory he was on, I think you can make a legit argument for him to be in Tier 1 with a guy like McCaffrey, with a guy like Eckler. Who knows? If he stayed healthy, he might have just straight up, outproduced those guys. The ACL, obviously a little bit concerning, but it does look like he is going to be on track to play in week 1. which, is obviously good to see. Maybe it takes him a few weeks to get back to 100%, to fully trust his body. But right now it's looking good for Breece Hall with Aaron Rodgers on that offense. The touchdown upside is going to be there. So I do like Hall. And if we keep getting positive medical reports, he may move up even higher than this. And then right behind him at number 7 in tier 3, I have Kenneth Walker, another guy coming off of an impressive rookie season. Walker really came in and took over once Rashad Penny went down for the season. In Kenneth Walker's 10 healthy starts, he averaged over 20 carries a game. I think for Walker here, the big question is just going to be his receiving work. It was kind of limited in 2022. We weren't sure if he could do it due to, not being super involved as a pass catcher in college. But if the Seahawks do give him that full 3-down workload, we could be looking at Kenneth Walker as a dude who's just like Breece Hall, making that jump into tier 1 moving forward. If he can't get that receiving work, maybe his ceiling is more of like a mid-tier RB1, maybe back-end RB1. But I think being, ranked here at number 7 is fair. At number 8, I'm going with Josh Jacobs. And if you want Jacobs higher, I'm really not going to push back too hard. He's going to be back with the Raiders, coming off of his massive breakout season where he was the RB4 in points per game. He had the highest opportunity share in the NFL, 20 carries a game, a solid 3.8 targets. If the Raiders are cool with just running back that workload, I feel like you have to feel pretty great about Josh Jacobs heading into the 2023 season. Jimmy G at quarterback, I don't think this offense is going to be fantastic, but if you're carrying the ball 20 times, getting targeted close to 4 times a game, you're going to put up fantasy points, regardless of how great the offense is. Now, at number 9, I have Tony Pollard. And to be completely honest, it seems tough to bump Pollard over a guy like Jacobs or Walker or Breece Hall, but this ranking really could be too low if the Cowboys don't bring in legit competition for him. Pollard was the RB9 in points per game last year, despite only having a 48.1% opportunity share. That was 34th in the NFL. So he didn't even have a top 32 workload at the running back position and still was a top 10 guy. And he did it while scoring 12 touchdowns. So that's a solid touchdown number, but he's not one of these guys that, wildly overproduced in touchdowns, scored 19, 20. That 12 touchdown number probably shouldn't fall off a ton, if at all. And you have to imagine his workload is going to increase with Zeke gone. He averaged 12.1 carries, 3.4 targets per game last season. Not a big workload. You bump that up to 15, 16 carries a game, 4.5 targets per game. Tony Pollard is going to be an absolute beast for fantasy football. Just really hoping the Cowboys don't make some crazy move and draft a Bijan Robinson in the first round. Now, the last player I have in tier 3, going to be Nick Chubb. I know there's a lot of big-time Nick Chubb fans out there. I did kind of squeeze him in here in tier 3. If you think he should be higher, not going to push back. He's definitely a guy who seems like a very safe option. He's likely going to be a mid to back end RB1 option. I just don't really know if he has that ceiling of a lot of the guys ranked ahead of him. It would just seem to be pretty shocking to see a huge jump in his receiving usage. Right, he's had 5 years of being pretty limited as a pass catcher, so I don't think heading into year 6 for him, they're going to be like, all right, let's just feed him as a pass catcher. Just doesn't seem super likely. Crazier things have happened, though. I do think this could potentially be a year where Nick Chubb has a huge boom in the touchdown department. If this Browns offense really can click, if Deshaun Watson is back to the Deshaun Watson we saw with the Texans, this could be a really legit offense. So that would obviously be going in the favor of Nick Chubb. But at the running back position, there's really no such thing as safety because injuries can happen to any of these guys. So if I'm drafting a running back, I want a guy who does have that super high upside. I'm not drafting a guy to be, the RB8. If I'm drafting him at RB8, I want a guy who can be a top 3 guy. And, maybe if they're a little less safe week to week, I'll take the risk there. But that's just me personally. You may really value that safety, which is totally fine. And now moving into tier 4, we've got the final 2 players at RB11 overall. This is where I have Ramondre Stevenson. He looks like he's lined up very nicely with, a lot of the big-time running backs already signed. We've got Damian Harris gone, James Robinson coming in. And, I've seen some people saying oh, J-Rob is going to compete with Ramondre Stevenson. If we're just looking at it Damian Harris is out, James Robinson is in. At this point in their careers, with James Robinson coming off the Achilles, I view Harris as like the wildly better player. He was a guy that was actively taking away opportunities from Ramondre Stevenson, and Stevenson was still able to finish as the RB14 in points per game. Now, Ramondre did kind of benefit from Damian Harris being banged up throughout the season, but he only scored 6 touchdowns in 17 games, which, if he had a normal touchdown number, he could have been, a locked in, potentially top 10 running back on a point per game basis. And like 6 touchdowns in 17 games with the workload he had, just very, very unlucky in that area. And it's not like he's a guy where they're taking him out on the goal line. Like Ramondre Stevenson is an absolute unit. Pretty sure he's over 230 pounds. And one of the things that I thought was interesting, at least for me, I felt like Ramondre's role as a pass catcher kind of went unnoticed throughout the season. Like when I was going back looking through his numbers, this dude averaged 5.2 targets per game, which was third amongst running backs in terms of total targets. He's going to need to hold on to that role if he wants to see his ceiling. But I mean, if he can put that together, plus steal a few carries away from what did go to Damian Harris on a Patriots offense that should be better this season, I think he's a super interesting guy who could break into like the mid-tier running back 1 area with a solid season. And then to wrap up these rankings at RB12, also in tier 4, this is where I have Travis Etienne. And full transparency, he's kind of a tough guy for me to rank because he's someone I was really high on heading into 2022. And early on in the season, that was looking like, a tough call. He was splitting with James Robinson. James Robinson was getting more of the opportunities. Etienne was making some mistakes. I think he dropped a few passes. He had some costly fumbles. But then Etienne comes in, and once he fully took over that backfield, I mean, this dude was dominant in his first 3 games operating as the guy. Like, these are his stat lines in the first 3 games where he was the RB1 for the Jags. 14 for 114 and a touchdown. That's on the ground. 24 for 156 and a touchdown, and then 28 for 109 and 2 touchdowns. So at that point, it's like, all right, Travis Etienne rest of season, he's going to cruise to, a mid-tier RB1 finish. He's going to be a top 5 guy rest of season. And then his production pretty much fell off. He found the end zone only 1 time in the next, I think it was like 8 games. He went on a really rough stretch, could not get into the end zone. And for me, the most shocking part of Etienne's season was just the lack of receiving production. He was a really strong pass catcher in college. He had that connection with Trevor Lawrence, averaged just 2.6 targets per game, and went over 3 targets only once in his 11 starts. So that's concerning. We're going to need to see that pick up in 2023, but I just don't really know what that workload is going to look like. I do think this offense is going to be a lot better, but I just would have liked to have that, receiving workload locked down for Etienne heading into next season. So I have him here at number 12. We'll see if he, moves up or down heading into the season. But that's going to wrap it up for my top 12. Let me know what you guys think. Like I said, still very early on in the offseason. I want to hear what you guys think. Who should be higher? Who should be lower? Did I leave someone off who should have cracked these rankings? Let me hear it down below. I'll make sure to get back to you. If you enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. I think actually tomorrow I'm going to be going through my wide receivers, maybe in a day or two. But I'll be going through my top 12 wide receivers, so stay tuned for that. Thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.